hello, everybody. Welcome to another very exciting episode of the Friends Talking Fantasy podcast. My name is Charles. With me, as always, is my co-host and lifelong friend, Dylan.
Thanks for that, Charles. We got a very special episode for you today.
Very special. We just finished recording with Ben and Jake over at the Fantology podcast. We were super happy that we were able to work out this buddy read of Emperor's Soul with the guys at Fantology, and I was really happy with how it came out.
I was too. I do have to make one correction, though, Charles. I know I'm going to take heat from you for even using this time to do this.
Okay.
But I think I said that something was anthropomorphized.
I do remember you
episode.
doing that, yeah.
And I meant personified, and it's been bugging me for days. And those are like opposites. And it's like, I think anthropomorphized is giving human characteristics to something that isn't human. And obviously personified is pretty much like making a human example out of something that isn't just a human, like an idea.
Right. I do remember you saying that, actually. I had forgotten. And now we can all, as listeners, wait for that moment when it comes up.
I know. I'm like, I was literally for days. Like, I was like thinking about it, lying in bed at night.
Dude, I wouldn't worry about it. When we finished recording, I was very excited with how it went. I think the friends are going to be in for a treat with this one.
Yeah, I mean, what more can you say than that we had Jake and Ben from Fantology on? I mean, they were just phenomenal and great
super
experts.
Knowledgeable of the Cosmere as well, which we greatly
totally
appreciated. As someone who's never read Stormlight, it was good to have people like Jake and Ben on who are very familiar with Sanderson's work and his world building and everything like that. So they provided some very valuable insight into this episode. And Emperor's Soul, what a great little read. Highly recommend.
Yeah.
Well,
and they're super nice dudes.
Super
so we
nice
will turn
dudes.
It, yeah.
And we were on their show not too long ago. We were talking with Stephen and Josh about the Two Towers, which was so much fun. Those guys have shown us nothing but love, and we greatly appreciate all the support and opportunities they've thrown our way recently. Just super happy.
Yeah. We have nothing but love in return for, I mean, everyone that we've worked with over at Fantology has been so awesome.
Absolutely.
So yeah, much love to Fantology, and any of y'all who are listening to this who haven't checked out that podcast, please do. You deserve it.
You deserve it, man. If you like what you listen to today here at the end of this episode, then you're gonna love what they've got cooking over there. So definitely check them out. But first, enjoy a very exciting discussion of The Emperor's Soul by Brandon Sanderson. Hello, everybody. Welcome to another very exciting episode of the Friends Talking Fantasy podcast. My name is Charles, and with me is my co-host Dylan, as always.
That's me. I'm ready to talk some fantasy with some friends here.
Yes, we have friends with us. One of our very first features on the Friends Talking Fantasy podcast. We have two of the guys over at Fantology podcast. We have Ben and we have Jake.
Hi, Charles. How you doing?
Hey, guys.
Hey.
Awesome. Guys, thank you so much for being here. We're super excited to have you on the show.
Yeah, we're excited to be here.
Awesome. Yeah, for all of our listeners who don't know, Fantology is a really awesome fantasy book podcast. They talk about all the latest books and series, and they're super knowledgeable. We were just on their show about a week ago to discuss Lord of the Rings. We were super honored that of all the series to be on for a fantasy podcast, Lord of the Rings. I mean, come on. We were very appreciative to be part of that. And now we're excited to have them in kind on our show to talk about Brandon Sanderson.
Yeah, we are huge Sanderson fans, and everybody I know, Jake is just like constantly on 17th Shard and just like always looking up these like deep, like interconnected Cosmere things. So Jake is like our in-house expert for the Cosmere.
I had a theory one time, and I was like, I'm the only one who's ever thought of this. So I had to like read through to make sure I was the only one, and I was like 99% sure, and I like posted it, and then like immediately was redirected to another post from years ago answering it, and I was like, okay, never mind. So that's
Yeah,
where
they
the
don't
bulk
mess
of my
around on that page.
yeah, that's the bulk of my knowledge is from trying to prove this theory that had already been disproven years ago.
Oh.
So
Well, I have a feeling you guys are going to be a great authority here. I know Dylan and I would really appreciate having a couple big Sanderson fans on with us to talk about Emperor's Soul and to get kind of more into the Cosmere and things like that. Um, so yeah, definitely check out Fantology. And I don't know, guys, do you want to take a quick moment to just kind of explain a little bit more about Fantology, or however you guys want to handle it? Mike is yours.
Yeah, so we are a group of 5 friends who about a year ago now started just doing a podcast about fantasy books. We were kind of inspired by the Legendarium, and all of us had spent quite a few of our formative years. We all went to high school together, and we all kind of started reading Wheel of Time, and then got into Sanderson, and kind of have grown from there. And so we just try and do 2 episodes a week talking about various fantasy books. So yeah.
That's awesome. We are no strangers when it comes to friends on the Friends Talking Fantasy podcast. We've known each other for a long time as well. We lived right down the street from each other for a very long time. I'm actually impressed that you've actually managed to coordinate amongst 5 of you. I mean, we're barely get by with 2 of us.
I mean, we coordinate with all 5 of us maybe once a month. The other times
Yeah.
it's we take who we can get.
It is always
Yeah,
a
it's kind of-
pleasure when the Fantology 5 all get together. And yeah, no, their show's awesome. Definitely check them out. If you like what we're doing over here, I am 100% confident you're gonna like what's going on over at Fantology. And
Definitely.
we're honored to have you guys over here. So
Yeah.
I'm pumped. It sounds like you guys are friends talking fantasy too, and you're just creative enough to come up with a name that isn't exactly what you're doing.
I don't know. I am a fan of your guys' little logo. I've always
Yeah.
been inspired by that. So
That's
Thank
Charles. who
you.
made
That was all me.
Yeah.
I picked the color. I picked the
He
blue.
did.
Charles
It
wanted to go
was-
with this really puke green color. It was pretty bad.
Yeah, that's fair. It was an ugly green for a long time before we changed it. But yeah, it was inspired by, it's kind of like a combination of Tolkien and Wheel of Time kind of combined.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely that JRR thing going on. I like it.
I've always thought
Right,
about the
and then-
Weezer W when I see it. So
Yeah.
Yeah,
Very good.
it's a bit of Weezer W also. You know, it's a universal thing.
It's the blue album.
Yeah.
Right. And I always like, how the 2 F's made the T, and it just kind of all came together by
Yeah.
accident.
He was really into that.
So thank you for noticing that. You guys recently in the Twitter world just got a new intro narrated. You got some VO work, guys. You want to talk about that really quickly? Because I'm still, like, you just explained it to me, but I'm still, like, impressed and in awe.
yeah, so Michael Kramer and Kate Redding were nice enough to narrate our intro for us, and with the suggestion that we always kind of try and tag their charity of choice, which is Books for Prisoners. And so that's the only requirement that they had, is whenever we get a chance to kind of plug that charity. So if you're looking for a good place to send some extra money during these crazy times, Books for Prisoners is the place to go for that.
Yeah.
Definitely. Glad we got to put that in.
Nice. Yeah. Books for prisoners. Head
Books
over
for
there.
prisoners.
Give them money.
Definitely. So that's awesome. So with introductions out of the way, let's now bring in The Emperor's Soul by Brandon Sanderson. This was my first read through of The Emperor's Soul. And Dylan, I believe it was your first read through as well, right?
It's my first read through as well. And I think this closes out reading all of the Cosmere for me,
Ooh,
actually,
nice.
except
Wow.
Arcanum Unbounded, which is on my.
Ooh,
I
okay.
don't know if that might count.
There's some doozies in there. Yeah.
Yeah. This can get
Okay, I
fun.
gotta check that out. But yeah, this is my first read through, and it was awesome. A lot of people say that this is Sanderson's best work in their opinion. I've seen that a lot. I mean, it was really good. I might be a little partial towards some of the door stoppers, but yeah, it was an awesome story.
And Ben and Jake, you guys, this is not new for you. You guys have read this a couple times, right? Is that right?
Yeah, this was my third read through. So I read it
Awesome.
once, like my first time, and then we were going on a road trip with my in-laws, and I convinced them. It was like exactly a 4 hour long road trip, and so I convinced everybody in the car that we needed to listen to it, and people loved it. Unfortunately, that is not transferred over to the Cosmere in general, but it was well received. And then I read it once again in preparation for this. So
Yeah, I
You'd
read it
have to
just.
take a long road. Oh, go ahead.
Oh, sorry. No, go ahead.
I was going to say you'd have to take a pretty long road trip to crank out any of the Stormlight audiobooks. So,
Yeah.
yeah,
That's a cross country for one
yeah.
book. I read it just once when I think like a year after it first came out and really liked it. And it was fun. I listened to it the second time in preparation for this, and it was fun to it's like when you haven't seen a movie in a really long time that you really liked. You're like, I remember liking parts of it, but I don't remember why exactly. So it's fun to almost relive it.
Awesome. Well, I'm really glad that we have people that have had a few read throughs on it of this book on with us. That's going to be really helpful. I just wanted to introduce this book kind of by going into Brandon Sanderson's inspiration for this book because I think it's interesting. I always usually like to just kind of talk about the author's background. I think it kind of informs the book as a whole. And Sanderson has gone on record as saying that this book was inspired by a trip he took to a museum in Taiwan. All this famous ancient masterpiece artworks that he would notice that all the different artworks had seals on them. And in some cases, emperors would go and see these like masterworks and put their own stamp on the work. And he was just kind of so fixated on that idea. He thought it was so interesting that an emperor would see a beautiful piece of work and decide he had to put his own stamp on it. And that kind of became the inception of this idea of forgery and soul stamps and this idea of rewriting the nature and objects of the existence of this object, which was surprising for me. Like Sanderson always is so good at this. When he introduces a magic system, it's always based in science and it always seems complicated, but I'm following him every step of the way. The way he explains it, like kind of that show don't tell idea. I mean, he's a master. I felt the same way when I was reading Mistborn and they explained the magic system in Mistborn, also very scientific. I was feeling that again. I was like, okay, we've got stamps and they can change histories. And I my first impression was, this is just Sanderson in his element writing these like science based hard magic systems.
yeah, I agree with that. I think that it kind of on that kind of the flip side to that coin is that he has so much knowledge of this kind of deeper overarching world that he's created. And so in his this is kind of essential to know as you read through Emperor's Soul is that there's three realms. There's the physical, cognitive, and spiritual realms. And each of those realms are kind of explored to varying degrees in each of his books. And so the fact that he's able to kind of draw on that wealth of world building that he's already done and condense it into this short story makes it feel very polished. And he's able to do it in such a way that he's not like throwing a ton of information there. It's more he's just like picking up little pieces that he's already developed in other places and working it together in this short story. So
Yeah, I'd agree. I think it's cool. Speaking of the different realms and realmatic theory, I think from this was my recollection when listening to it is this was one magic system that was a lot more spiritual realm focused than I think a lot of his other ones. I could be wrong on that, but I can't think of another one that was so much focused on the actual essence, the spiritual essence of an object, and how that gets manipulated.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
a good point, Jake. It's surprisingly soft for Sanderson, where it's like, oh yeah, like I was able to turn that glass into a stained glass because it had a little piece left, and I could change its history. Like it's looser than something like in Mistborn, which is like here's
Yeah,
these and here's their opposites, and you push and pull, and they do these things. It seems more open to interpretation of the possibilities of what you can do with this
yeah.
soul stamp system.
but at the same time, like you said, he explains it in such a cause and effect mathematical way that you're like, oh, like of course. You just have to
Yeah.
kind of
Yeah.
make that little jump. But yeah.
One thing that I was kind of a little let down by, and maybe this is because there's just not enough pages in the book, but there was never like a limit to her powers. Like she never tried to do something and it backfired, and it was just so I feel like normally in a Sanderson book you kind of have this kind of ebb and flow of powers and trying to push your powers to a new limit, and maybe like the powers backfiring on you a little. And we didn't really see that in this book. It was more she just kept on pushing her limits. So
Hmm. That's a great point, Ben. I didn't really think about that. It feels like maybe second or third read through realization, or maybe you're just a closer reader than I am. But yeah, it seems like there's these things presented like, oh, it would be really, really hard to be able to do that. And usually Shay is so good at that thing that it's like, oh, I just need some time and I would be able to do that. And we don't really run into any points in which that is actually overconfidence or anything like that, which would have been a kind of interesting thing to explore if we were attached to Shay's perspective and getting this like, well, I'm a master forger, I can do anything with the right time and materials, and then see, oh, well, maybe not. But yeah, it's such a tight story
Yeah,
in this
I mean,
novella that we don't get to see
there
that.
were a few moments where she was trying soul stamps on Gautona and they weren't taking, but then she immediately was like, "Oh, I know how to fix it." I
Yeah.
think from the beginning she was presented as this savant master artist, and she kind of remained that way. And I think a large reason for that is one, it's a short book, so she just needs to be good. But two, I think it plays into one of the main themes of this book, which I would be curious to hear your thoughts, Ben and Jake, on what Dylan and I kind of identified as perhaps one of the main themes of this book, which is artistic integrity. This idea of like, this is a work of art. It's something that I have pride over, this idea of self expression while also trying to recreate an object. And like, she kind of needs to be a savant in order to have that higher sense of pride and to take on this seemingly impossible task of recreating a soul.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. The whole artistic integrity, like throughout the book, Gautona, if I'm not sure how to pronounce that, I hope I'm doing it right.
Right. Me neither, but
he kept saying like what a waste of your potential. Like you have all this talent, why aren't you just an artist? And I think like for Shay, her like it was she was being an artist by doing this. Her forgery was her art. It wasn't you're being a forger, why aren't you artist? In her mind, those are the same things. She brings up a good point where she replaced a painting with a fake, with a forgery, and she's like, what does it matter if people still enjoy it for what it is? And forgers will be able to see it as a work of art in the realm of forgery as well. So it's like this double art going on there.
yeah, I really like how they also like Sanderson was great in the fact that he took it one level deeper, where he made the original artist commission her, or like, I mean, it made it sound like she was kind of his, I forget his name, but she was his apprentice almost. And then he asked her to destroy the painting. And so then you have
Right.
like this tug of war between like Gautona and the the original painter, and like, does the art belong to everybody that's seen it, or does it still belong to the artist? And you still like, so there's so many different levels of, is
Yeah.
she an artist, or is she does she just copy things? And then who does the art really belong to, and does it make a difference if nobody knows if it's a fake or the real thing? So there's a lot of levels there.
For sure. Yeah, I really appreciate that. I think Sanderson probably toys with some of those ideas as someone who is an author and releases books out into the world. And he's like, hey, do I still own this book? And we've definitely seen examples of authors that like to feel like they do still very much own the book and retcon stuff and say stuff that a lot of times fans don't like. And then we've also seen examples of people who kind of just put something out into the world and say, like, okay, it belongs to everyone who's reading it, or in the case of maybe something Shay would create, like everyone who is looking at it and enjoying it.
Yeah, one of my favorite things that Sander, I was reading Reddit, and he posted on, I forget what Reddit subpage it was on, but he asked the mods for permission to post there, and the commenters were one commenter was saying, what author asked for permission to post about his own work? And Sanderson replied saying, "Hey, look, this community is for fans. It's not necessarily for me to come in
Yeah.
and dictate." And so he's very cognizant of that relationship of the fans kind of building a world for themselves that he can be adjacent to, but not necessarily dictate.
I feel like very few authors have respect for readers like Brandon Sanderson does, from how he communicates with his audience, from even how he writes, of like, I
Mhm.
got to make sure I keep the pace moving, that it's easy to understand, that I'm not going so deep into lore that you forget things, that I make sure the ending has a big payoff for the reader and things like that. It's like, for me, his reading experience, you're always kind of guaranteed a good minimum 7 out of 10 ride when you go with Sanderson, because he knows how to kind of deliver on the reading experience at every level, and he's always kind of thinking about that, which I've always
Yeah.
greatly appreciated.
Yeah, he's always thinking how is this going to be enjoyed by the fans, which is kind of in contrast to what we are talking about with the artist inside the novel or the novella, how he wanted his artwork destroyed. And I don't know if you guys
Yeah.
have read The Fountainhead. It's a pretty controversial book.
No.
I'm not don't
No.
want to really get into it. It's by Anne Rand. I can never say her name right. She had some pretty strong philosophies, but in it, this main character is an architect, and his whole idea is this like artistic integrity, and he like ends up burning down a building he commissioned because they changed like a little bit to his design, and in his mind is like, if you're not going to do my art the way I want it, then no one can have it. And just that idea in the book, he's justified, but I like just that thought experiment of who really owns the art. Like
Yeah.
Right.
Gautona would say the people who have viewed it own it now. They're the ones experience it, whereas the artist in the book is more like, this was mine. I don't like the way it's being used, so let's destroy it.
Right. And I think one of the really interesting things that Sanderson does is he basically has two main character arcs when it comes to like artistic integrity and what is art and who is art for. You have the main character, right? And
Mm-hmm.
she is this idea of a forger, where it's like, my greatest achievement is to have something in plain sight that everyone believes to be real that isn't. And then she learns to be more honest and,
Mm-hmm.
kind of bend it a little bit for the greater good in terms of the Emperor's soul. Like, I kind of guided him a little bit. He probably would have done it. And then on the opposite end, you have Gautona, who is like, art is meant to be enjoyed. It's a masterpiece. It doesn't belong to you anymore. And then in the end, we know he like kind of comes around as well, and he burns the basically blueprints to the Emperor's soul, where he's like, some things are best left kind of as a mystery
Yeah.
and should be left back in history. So I thought that idea of artistic integrity, how Sanderson weaved it in two ways, and how they kind of, how Gautona and, how do we say the main character's name?
I was saying Shay.
How they kind of ended up compromising and meeting in the middle with each other. It was very interesting.
Yeah, I think that first of all, I love how Sanderson he doesn't give any answers here. He just asks a lot of questions. So that's awesome. And I really I also like how I love how Gautana is able to put aside his preconceived notions and offer himself up as a test subject to this thing that he felt was evil, and by the end he's able to really read and appreciate her work for what it was. When he's sitting there reading the Emperor's Soul, the book that she made for him, and he just is like reveling in how intricate and how it's like the greatest artwork that he's ever seen, and how much of a journey that was from the beginning, where he just didn't want anything to do with it, and he thought it was this blasphemy that she was doing. So I loved Gautana's arc. I thought it was great.
Me too.
Yeah, and the parallel in the difference between how he reacts to her forged art, and then how by the end he's reacting to her forged emperor. Like, you get to see that transformation really, I guess, through the emperor, almost anthropomorphized, where it's like, oh yeah, well, like, here maybe a little adjustment here or there isn't too bad. And that's something that I'm interested in hearing y'all's opinion on. I know that Ben, you were saying that we got more questions than answers here, and I'd agree with that, especially around the decision that Shay makes to basically nudge the Emperor in a particular direction to be the man that he could have been. Basically to try to make him a better or more proactive emperor that stands up for his ideals. And I'm wondering what y'all think, since Sanderson doesn't really give us an answer. Is that manipulation? Is it a fair move? Is it both?
Yeah, that is tough. One thing that I will say is he set up Shay's character. He foreshadowed that really well, right? Because like even the who's the kind of the skeleton caster, like
The bloodcaster.
Right, the
I don't know his
bloodcaster,
name.
and she kind of, even though she didn't like him and he was the boogeyman for her, she still kind of nudged him and in the end tried to make his life better. And so we really do see Shay's influence both on the bloodcaster and on Galtana. Like she always tried to make people the best versions of themselves. And so I thought that her doing that to the Emperor kind of fit into that same character that Sanderson developed for her.
Yeah, and she kind of called that conning. Like she said, she conned Gautona by being honest, which made, I don't know, kind of made him better. And then again with the Blood Sealer, I think another big theme of this book is a person's identity, and the idea that I think everyone agrees that depending on who you're with, like when you're with your family, you're one version of yourself. When you're with your close friends, you're another version. When you're at work, you're another version of yourself. And that idea is really hit on in this book. And then also the idea that every choice you make is like, they say something about it in the book, like the first step on this path, or I don't remember the quote, but something
right.
like,
it's not like a detour; it's a gradual step in that direction until you find yourself looking for the trail again. Right?
Yeah,
I
exactly.
remember that.
Yeah.
Great quote.
Thank you. I couldn't remember what it was, but yeah. And so like we could all be so many different people while still being, I think, the same core person, and it depends on these slight actions we make that lead us down these paths, like you said. And then how we react to whatever we find on that path can like change us further. And I think that was kind of the idea behind her nudging the Emperor, is
absolutely,
kind of resetting, like pushing him down a little, like some paths, or helping him overcome certain things that had, I don't know, like not galvanized, what's the word, but had made him harder,
right.
But
that made him also more inclined to like go out to dinner parties and things, and not kind of be more of a stern ruler.
Yeah.
I would also say, like, to play on the identity thing, because they do this thing of like, to influence something is to kind of slightly change it, the art of subtlety and like the exponential effects it has on influence. But there's another like part of that Sanderson works in, which, like, the way I've been kind of thinking of it in my head is like, to change someone is to know someone, right? Like she needs to have a very intimate understanding of whatever she's trying to influence, even slightly, right? So like even the bloodborne guy, who, not bloodborne, is it bloodborne?
It's a blood. I looked it up. It's a blood sealer. I think I said bloodcaster earlier, so I led everyone astray. I nudged them in the wrong direction there.
Yeah, so it was your fault.
It's blood magic.
I'm bringing out the worst, not the best, like Shay would have.
But yeah, like she, even someone that she kind of did not like, or was maybe afraid of a boogeyman, like you said, Ben, she still had to kind of understand him, and that he had like a romantic partner far away back at home, and that he was waiting for letters and things like that, to the point where she was able to be like, you should just go home. She doesn't care about how much money you're making. She just wants you back. So I thought that idea of like having to intimately understand someone to influence them was a really interesting way to work with people, and also with the inanimate objects like the walls, and she has to know all the different gradations of limestone in order to put a stamp on it. So I just thought that was an interesting part of Brandon Sanderson's magic system that was heavily woven into this theme of identity you were talking about.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
I really love the fact that you can, like, if you understand kind of the deeper workings of the Cosmere, all that makes so much sense. And it's really cool that he's been able to make a story that both evolves this deeper magic system that he's creating and also gives you a very satisfying read, even if you know nothing else about it.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess one other criticism that I have about this book, though, I didn't love the various soul stamps that Shay had made for herself, only because we didn't really get to see the kind of big one in action, of her alternate personality, where she could potentially become a farm girl. Or
The
I
nuclear
wanted
option.
more of the nuclear option, right? I wanted that. I wanted something to happen. Either she destroys it, says she's never going to use it, or she actually does use it. And maybe we're going to see another story with Shay where she's having to confront that. I don't know.
Yeah,
But
it did. It did feel a little like Chekhov's gun that never went off. It's like you
mhm,
spent a lot of time making sure that we understand that she has that nuclear option, and I guess you'd think it would play a bigger role than it ended up playing there. I guess the role it ends up playing is that she tells Ganina, if that is how we're saying it,
I don't know.
Gaiatona. Um,
It's probably
she tells Gaiatona that she is going to make him a character
Yeah.
in that story, basically a kindly grandfather. And I guess that means a lot to him. But I feel like, yeah, you didn't need to flesh out the nuclear option to establish that that was kind of the relationship that got developed there. So I'm with you on that one, Ben. Uh, I guess I was expecting a little bit more.
I saw
Yeah.
all her different soul stamps is just a really good way to dive into her character and show,
Mm,
like, give more depth to her character. You have the, like, her tough side, and then her more sensitive side, and then the side where it's just kind of like a reset. And I thought it gave her like a good sense of vulnerability. Um,
Hmm.
so I really liked it. I liked the kind of the mystery it left at the end of whether she'd ever have to use it. And I was kind of thinking the whole time, like, why, still, why would she ever want to use this? What would cause her to want to do that? But
Right. I also saw it as another way Sanderson was explaining the magic system without
mm,
going into
yeah,
straight up telling us how it works, like, and to also kind of hint at the potential of it. I mean, like when we read through Mistborn, right? It was our second read through when we read it for the show, and you start to see how he was dropping clues in for
right.
big reveals later in the book. So this time around, I was like, is this a clue? Like, is this going to get subverted somehow? Like, is someone going to use this stamp against her? Like, you start to get the wheels turning because, like you guys said, so much
Mm,
time was spent talking about this particular version, this
hmm,
particular stamp, this particular version of her. So I was like, yeah, I guess it kind of whimpered out. It was a nice gesture that he got the cool uncle role, but it
yeah.
seemed like it didn't kind of pay off from all the buildup we got. But you know what? It doesn't always have to work that way. It was just nice to see the ways in which stamps can work, and I do also like how, like, it's broken into chapters which are the days, and she has a
Yeah.
100 days, and it goes from day
Mhm.
40 to day 70. And I like how, like, one of the ways Sanderson establishes how much time has gone by between day 40 and day 70 is how much nicer Shay's room gets.
yeah,
It's like, oh yeah, like, I decided to make the bed more comfortable. I decided to put in stained glass windows. I feel every time they open the door, they're like, what did you do to the wall? So it's like, that was a fun way that we were able to get that sense of time, and to get to see again how the stamps are used to do things. That had a little more of a payoff to it, but all in all, it
Mhm,
was all kind of worked into, like, introduced, because for me this was an introduction into a lot of the Cosmere and into um the physical, cognitive, spiritual realms you guys are talking about. This is my first foray into that, so I guess I kind of appreciate it as, like, okay, we're seeing what's out there and what's possible, and I'm
yeah.
understanding it. I'm ready to go.
It did seem like this I can't remember if it's a short story or novella or really what the difference is. But anyways, this story is kind of framed around the idea of explaining to the reader what is like the soul stamps, what is this magic system, how can it be used, and then sprinkling these themes that we've kind of talked about. Before we go away from the soul stamps, or I just wanted to mention, and no spoilers, I'll be sensitive here, but when Shay breaks out her own stamps, just the fact that she had these different versions of herself at the ready to go definitely reminded me of somebody in Stormlight. And I wonder if they were influenced by each other or they're independent ideas, like if Brandon had this idea first or the other character first, or how that came to be. But
Yeah, Jake, it is interesting how you can start to see some parallels and themes that Sanderson likes to explore, and this is definitely one. And I feel the same way about the character that you're talking about now out of Stormlight. And another thing that popped up for me, especially around the thing that you were saying earlier around nudging people and kind of trying to nudge them in the right direction, typically, is it felt like it raised some similar stuff that comes up around Breeze, actually, in Mistborn too, where it's like, are you manipulating them? Is this kind of messed up? Or are you just doing the same things that someone who didn't have magical powers but was pretty persuasive and can influence people that way is doing? It's Sanderson touching on some similar things, but it does feel like even when he revisits stuff, he's able to find some new interesting ways to bring more depth to it.
He does always seem pretty pro manipulation, though.
He does seem to come down a little on that side sometimes.
I felt like Emperor Soul was less pro manipulation than Breeze, for example.
I'd agree.
That's fair, yeah.
But they both do kind of hint at this. Is free will really like a thing, or are we all just reacting to other things, reacting to soothing or high charisma roles or whatever?
Yeah. And does the ends justify the means, right? What Shay did will probably make a lot of people's lives better. It'll probably improve the Empire. It'll probably make the Emperor more in line with who he would have wanted to be anyway.
Yeah.
But is it her place to make that? Yeah, I guess that's a good point, Jake. Yeah. But even if that was all true, is it worth it? And is it something that is fair to do?
Yeah, I feel like Breeze plays pretty fast and loose with the manipulation. He doesn't really think about it too hard, where at least Shay has that artistic integrity we're talking about, where she actually wants to recreate an honest interpretation of the Emperor, not exactly just create an Emperor that will go fetch her a beer whenever she's thirsty.
Speaking of
one thing...
Oh, go ahead, Ben. Go ahead.
One thing that's interesting, though, is because we see that Galtana kind of tried to do the same thing, only failed at it, right? Like, he tried to kind of nudge and manipulate the Emperor his whole life, right? And he got him to become the Emperor, but past that, his nudging kind of ended up in a spot that he didn't want it to. And so you kind of do get this idea that, we can try and help people or nudge them along, but sometimes they're going to end up making choices we don't like.
Yeah. And I think the difference here is that in that case, there was the option to do that, right? Like in the way that Shay does it, there's no option of how it will or won't work out. And it was interesting to me to listen, to have Shay being like, oh yeah, years later, this will start to happen. It'll kind of slowly creep up. I'm like, oh my, you've just set this person's path in motion exactly the way you want for years.
I love how she, during her escape plan, she couldn't help but see if it worked too. Like going back to that, I clumped that in with artistic integrity, right? Like she wanted to be faithful to it, and she wanted, like, she wasn't just trying to figure out how do I get out of this. This was an artistic problem she wanted to solve, and she needed to see if she did it right, like what the outcome was.
For sure. And go ahead.
I was going to say, going back to Charles's point of having this kind of countdown, and we see this countdown fighting against her desire to finish out this work. Like she had this plan in place to escape, but she couldn't bring herself to do it. And so I feel like the countdown and her artistic desires kind of really played off each other to make for a compelling story.
Yeah.
I totally agree. And I love how you get to see in Jay's perspective how she's kind of rationalizing it to herself throughout. She's like, oh, yeah, no, I mean, I probably could wait another couple days. And I mean, it'd even be better maybe if I waited then and then tried to escape. Yeah, it's like, and when push comes to shove, it really is that artistic integrity piece that Jake was talking about, that you just, end of the day, you've been working on this thing so hard and you care so much about the art that you make. You just gotta see it through.
Right.
Yeah.
And she had multiple times. She could have escaped, started her escape plans on like day 7. She's like, now's the moment. But she hesitated. And she's like, why did I do that? And she's like, well, I know why, because this challenge is too tempting to pass up and walk away from. And there's this really great moment where she goes into the emperor's room, and there's this quote where it's, I wish that I could know you, not your soul, but you. I've read about you. I've seen into your heart. I've rebuilt your soul as best I could. But that isn't the same. It isn't knowing someone, is it? That's knowing about someone, which I think is another like huge theme of this book, where it's like, I know of you, but I don't know if this will work. I don't know how you will handle this, if it will take. I don't know about you as a person now. So it's a very interesting kind of dichotomy there.
Yeah, like she knew him well enough to recreate him basically, but
Right.
she's acknowledging that even though she kind of recreated him, it's more like jump starting this person. And he's not just going to be a copy of her stamp, he's his own person.
Right.
Yeah.
And there's something about like knowing all the details about someone, but there's still that magic piece, right? Because it's the
Yeah.
emperor's soul. And it's like, what is a soul? Is it something that you could read all of his journals and talk to all his buddies and read the history books and be able to repeat? Or is there always going to be that piece of humanity, of soul, that we kind of leave to chance and put a little artistry into to make happen, which is a very interesting part of it. And I think Sanderson using this kind of idea of an artist making a soul and having that artistic interpretation is important, because just analytically trying to one for one copy the soul, you're going to leave some pieces out. Not everything you can record in data form or in a journal form. So she had to kind of get creative with relationships and things like that. So it's a very interesting look into not just artistic integrity and identity, but also kind of like, what is a soul? A very heavy question in this very small book.
Have you guys read Speaker for the Dead by Orson Scott Card?
No, tell us about it.
The role of the Speaker for the Dead is like to go around and just get to know the deceased person so well, and then speak at their service in a way where you're not just giving a eulogy, but you're just basically recreating, like giving details of all their strengths and weaknesses, and just giving, like, letting people understand like who the person was. And it kind of reminds me of that, where she had to just get to know him. And a theme in that book as well is, you can't like get to know someone 100% without just coming to love that person, because you see all their flaws, but you see all their motivations that led them to those paths. You see like all their desires. And I know, going back to what Charles said at the beginning, where in order for her to get to know these people, to kind of con them, she has to love them. Like, you have to be on that level in order to
That
understand them well
intimate
enough.
understanding of them.
Yeah.
So, kind of fun fact, you brought up Orson Scott Card. So Brandon Sanderson was actually Orson Scott Card's student at one point. And so yeah, it's kind of they have that relationship with each other, and you can kind of see that sometimes in Sanderson's writing, I think. Yeah, so
nice fun fact.
That is a fun fact.
Yeah. Well, we're lucky to have you guys and your vast knowledge on Brandon Sanderson and the Cosmere over here.
Yeah.
So one question I had, Jake, I was meaning to ask you about this. We know that this book is set in Cell, right?
Uh-huh.
Which is the same planet that Elantris takes place on. I'm not sure. Elantris was the first Cosmere book that Sanderson wrote, and it's the first one that I read. So it's been years since I've read it. Is this a long time after that? I mean, I have a hard time really understanding how those two magic systems relate to each other.
So, have you guys read Elantris?
I have.
I
not.
have.
Okay.
We're split down the middle.
Should we get Charles to mute himself?
I'll be a good test for the audience here.
I'll be more vague, but both magic systems, the soul stamping and forgery and blood sealing, all that, and the aeons from Elantris, they both have to do with these symbols, or like in the stamp, it's how you create the stamp, and they both have cores to them that are very similar. Without going into spoilers, I never thought about it this way, but on Coppermine they said that it's meant to reflect computer programming, and I have like a small grasp of computer programming, so I didn't catch that similarity until reading this, but how it's like these basic building blocks, and it's like each magic system on Cell is like a different computing language. So the Aeons could be like Python, and then
I know from my research of this book that there's the Fool character that comes up, and that's actually a character that's directly referenced in another book that I have not read.
It was originally supposed to be Hoid, and Hoid makes appearances in a lot of
right. That
pretty much all the Cosmere
timeline
books, right?
Unless the person's immortal, it would maybe link the timelines a little bit.
Hoid is very old. Yeah.
Yeah. But they wrote they wrote out, or Sanderson wrote out that the Fool was Hoid in here because apparently the alpha readers didn't like that. So,
really?
Well, they wrote out the scene that kind of embellishes it, but I think the character is still the same, right?
We just don't know for sure that it is Hoid, at least from the context of this book. But maybe I want to defer to Jake over here. He's the expert on this.
I think it is supposed to be Hoid.
Right.
And going by that, then I think this takes place after Elantris, but not a long time after. Sorry, my explanation got way nudged off the rails. But yeah, so that's how the magic kind of relates in the time period.
Okay, so this isn't like Age 3 Cosmere, like
I don't think so.
Okay,
I could be wrong in that, but I don't think so. Because they said there's going to be an Elantris 2, and he's toying around with the idea of Shay, whichever, being in that book, or at least or referenced. And I had this idea of what if she's just this. She's gone nuclear, and she's just this farm character that you come across,
she's like hosting an inn or something.
And that's like her reference, which would be sad, but also kind of cool to have that be her cameo.
It'd be interesting if she was very happy as the farm character or farm girl character or whatever it was, right? I think that could raise some cool questions, because
like ignorance is bliss kind of thing.
I feel like because Shay, she's taking some huge risks. She's getting herself in some rough situations, like being on death row, and sometimes you really do wonder if she's actually happy with.
I just feel like she loves the artistry of it so much that she couldn't be fulfilled without it. That's my takeaway.
But if she didn't know about it, that is that ignorance is bliss. Yeah,
she's just like a really cool painter.
What if her personality fought to like escape that farm girl role? Like, even though she like knows herself so well and she's like set all these safeguards, what if, I don't know, like that could be a compelling story too.
Well, wouldn't the stamp just not stick then? It would just,
I don't know, Mr.
well, isn't that the kind of idea? If it's like so fundamentally against the core of that person, like it's not a plausible change, then it would
a soul stamp paradox.
Yeah.
Well, it's interesting that when she takes on the other persona that can fight, she is vaguely aware that Shay, I know she built that into that
Yeah.
soul stamp, but that Shay would want certain things and even listens at times, right? That's why she tries to give a helpful nudge to the blood sealer, is because she's like, oh, Shay would probably be upset if I didn't do this.
Charles, you need
Well,
to
and
read
we know that this.
Stormlight.
I did not read Stormlight. No,
You
no.
need to
Yeah,
read
he's saying
it.
you need to.
Oh, I know. I need to. There's a lot I need to read. I need to read Stormlight, Elantris. I need to read Fountainhead and Speaker for the Dead. I need to read all these things.
I don't know if you need
No.
to read Fountainhead.
Yeah, don't read
but-
Fountainhead.
Yeah, you need to read 4,000 pages to prepare for this like 300-page novella that you're.
I will say, well, I'm curious, maybe in a little bit, getting into where you guys, as such well-read Cosmere fans, kind of rank this in. It could be fun to do even a little Cosmere ranking system here. Yeah. I don't know if you guys need some time to think. I kind of just threw this on you.
Okay, so I will say that if somebody asked me, say they've never read Sanderson, and they asked me what book they should read first, my old answer would have been Mistborn. And
Yeah.
if they've like already read Wheel of Time or something, I would say Mistborn. But like if I know that they have maybe read Harry Potter and that's it, then I would say pick up Emperor's Soul. And if you like that, then read other Sanderson books. If you found it intriguing but you weren't like totally into it, then don't go through the trouble. You know what I mean? But so I would say, as an intro to who Sanderson is and his writing style, you can't beat this book.
That
it's
is
really
true, Ben. It is a
accessible.
pretty low barrier to entry for this one, right? You
Right.
could read it in an evening and get a good sense of Sanderson's style right off the bat. Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah, I really like all his short stories, honestly. Probably my top three are this one, Six of the Dusk, and what's the Silence? Shadows for Silence and the Forest of Hell. I think that's what it's called. Super long title. But this is one of, like you guys are saying, it's so accessible. It's just, you dive right in. The plot is compelling, but it also makes the magic system understandable and compelling at the same time.
Yeah.
It won like the Hugo Short Story
It
Award or
did.
something.
Yeah.
For best novella, I think in 2013, if I'm remembering correctly, that's really high honors. And it was. I felt like I would have liked to have read this before doing Stormlight. After I finished it, I even just as you guys have been talking about, with how succinctly and well the whole three different realms concept is explained. And I won't spoil anything about Stormlight, but obviously as a part of the Cosmere, that it has a role. And it felt like I would have come into Stormlight with just like a very good, simple understanding of those things, rather than I think he does a little more of just like, yeah, this is happening now, and okay, in Stormlight than he does in Emperor's Soul.
I loved Shay's explanation to Gautana, how she was like, this exists regardless of if you believe it, and she's like not interested in trying to convince him that it's real. You know what I mean? She's like,
Yeah,
you can go on believing that that 50 different suns rise every morning or whatever his belief was. He's like
a new sun rises every day. It's never the same one. Right.
Yeah, exactly. And it's just such a cool like she's not out there to be like this minister of the three realms. She's just like, hey, this is how I'm explaining how I'm doing it. It's up to you if you want to believe that explanation or not.
Yeah, it's funny juxtaposed against that whole sun thing, which is you've got Gaudana saying that it's like, oh yeah, your like wacky belief system, and she's like, my wacky belief system is stuff that can actually do like consequential things in the real world, and yours is focused on there being a bunch of different suns. It's like, how can you think that I'm the one with the weird belief system here?
And she never takes it too personally either. I think it comes from having a very strong understanding of everything and everyone.
Yeah. And security in knowing that you're the right one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
so,
go ahead.
This is one thing. I feel like one of my criticisms of this book is that every character was kind of a Mary Sue in their own right. Right? Like you have Galton who's kind of a Mary Sue, you have Shay who's kind of a Mary Sue. Like each of these characters, and we talked about this kind of with Shay, how she kind of like never hits her limits or whatever. But that kind of bothered me as well, even with Gautana, how he's always able to humble himself just enough to understand Shay's perspective. Did, did that bother you guys too, or
Well,
no?
it's interesting, Ben. You raise a complicated subject for us at the FDF podcast. We've been toying
Yeah.
around with the idea of like Mary Sue as applicability and how helpful it is, because we feel like, especially after having read the King Killer Chronicle, and we dove
Right.
into all the online discussions around it, and we've been wondering, and I'm curious to hear from you guys too about this while we have some awesome, knowledgeable guests on. It's like uh, sometimes we wonder, is the Mary Sue thing like keeping us from just stepping back and saying like, okay, wait, but was the book good? Was the character good? Was the, it's like, because like Quoth is almost the poster child of this at this point, and it's like part of what makes him an interesting character is that he's kind of a Mary Sue that we know from the beginning. That's not a spoiler. We know from the beginning has kind of this tragic thing that happens
Right.
to him that creates the frame story. So it's like, yeah, what do you guys think about that?
Yeah,
The term
I'm
Mary
very
Sue.
curious, but I do
Yeah.
want to put it in context
Sure.
of Shay first, and then get your opinions. Because, and also, Dylan, just to put your mic like a little, like an inch away from you. Just a little, you're kind of
Thanks.
peeking
Yeah.
a little bit. But so for me, for Shay, like when it comes to a Mary Sue, like a Mary Sue for me, I have a very extreme, like very few characters are Mary Sue in my world. You have to really have unearned powers that kind of break the storyline. Like for me, very, very mild spoilers for Star Wars, right? But you have Rey, who's never flown the Millennium Falcon before, who's lived in a desert, and she's out maneuvering TIE fighter pilots, and she rerouted the electricity of the Millennium Falcon, diverted power, and she picked up a lightsaber for the first time ever, and she's holding off someone trained by Luke Skywalker. So it's like, yeah, that's kind of like Mary Sue
Yeah.
level. But I think for the sake of the story of Emperor's Soul, Shay is a talent and a perfectionist with a very high level of integrity for her art. And she has to be super good in order to have been put in this situation of being the only person ever to create a soul, and to create a soul in 100 days when she was expecting years and years. So, and it's from the very beginning, we know that she's an expert and she's had years of this, and she kind of gets hints at her training and stuff. So for me, I can kind of forgive it. It is a story about a perfectionist being a perfectionist. So there is kind of, I get where you're coming from with that. And maybe more so with Gautona, where he also is a character who doesn't do much wrong in this and is very understanding in a position you'd expect someone to be kind of super biased. Um, but he is a political leader. He's right hand of the emperor, and he
Right.
is learning this whole time over 100 days from Shay. And he's just trying to appreciate what's happening because he cares about the emperor. So for me, that idea of Mary Sue kind of doesn't apply for me in this case, but I get that because it is a book about perfectionists, that I can see where you're coming from. But for me, and I'm curious to hear what you guys think about the whole Mary Sue thing, like Dylan was saying, but that's just where I'm coming from for Emperor's Soul.
That's
I
actually, yeah. I think you changed my mind, so I'm willing to
Yes,
admit that
Dylan,
you
we
just changed
did
my
it.
mind about that. Yeah.
One at a time.
I agree with you. But also when I'm reading or watching something, I never really think about the Mary Sue thing until after, like I have to take myself out of it. Like with the Ray
Yeah.
thing, I never would have thought to call her a Mary Sue until
Right.
people did, and then I'm like, oh yeah, I never really feel like she's not going to be able to do anything. I'm always like, okay, like it's just the expectation she solves the problem, and there's no like
Right.
tension there. But with this one, I agree. I don't think she's a Mary Sue. I think she is talented, and the fact that I felt the first time reading it, there's this tension. Is she going to be able to do it, or is she just going to figure out a way to escape? Like
Yeah.
there's this tension there, the suspense. With Gautona, I guess I never really would have thought he was a Mary Sue just because he's a secondary character. So in my mind, it's like whatever. But I guess he could have done something more like Javert with his hate for the soul stamps. Like it could have been cool if at the end he's like emotionally crushed that this emperor who he loves is tainted by his creation or whatever, but
Right.
that's kind of a different feel than the story was going for. But
and the forgery wouldn't have been complete. He
like tears out the stamp or something and like demolishes her work. I mean, that would have been a twist.
Yeah,
if he grandstands and kills the emperor anyway. Yeah.
But yeah,
I do feel I'm with what all you guys are saying. I do feel there's a little sense here of Gaetona as kind of just like this paragon of moral virtue and like only does good things all the time, and then it's kind of contrasted with Frava, who's just like pure bad and evil. And I think as someone who's more attracted to morally gray characters, that was a bit of a downside. I know you only have so much time in this novella to hash out the nuance, and Shay feels a lot more nuanced, but I definitely see the criticism that you're getting at there, Ben, and I think it's a valid one. I think especially with Gaetona, if I can ever say that correctly, where it's like, okay, like your thing is that you're just genuine all the time, but you're so good at being genuine that you can manipulate people with it. It's like, like I get why you're in this, but
So maybe not so much Mary Sue is maybe one dimensional, which probably could be forgiven for being a novella. It's just like reading other Sanderson works. Like you have characters that like are dealing with like crippling depression, and you have like all these like these deep seated like multiple like just parts of your personality that you're trying to grapple with, and we didn't see that. And again, I can forgive that because of the format of the book. It was just, I wish it left me wanting more. I'm like, I just want to read about what Shay does after this, and get to know her better.
That's fair. I mean, you also have, to be fair, Sanderson also has side characters like Ham and like clubs and people like that. I mean, they exist. I think it's just the nature of you're a B character in a novella. Like you can only get fleshed out so much. He was important in that he goes through the same arc that Shay does, just coming from the opposite direction, which is interesting to see. I do kind of get that sense that he's a little bit more one-dimensional, where at least with Shay, like Jake was saying, you don't know if she's going to escape or if she's going to commit to the task. Like she's smart enough to know that this task is impossible, but she's also so smart that she takes it as a challenge that she can't resist. So kind of balancing that, it was super interesting. And we just didn't have that same kind of nuance to any other character in this book. But
I say that we don't have a lot of nuance, but we spent like the book was 4 hours long recorded, and we spent an hour talking about it. So obviously, there's a lot of nuance that that they fit in. So.
Very true. No, it's brilliant, and I know by the end of the show, you guys like to do a top 3, bottom 3, but there's only two main characters in this whole book. You could rank them, I guess.
You're gonna have to throw the blood sealer in there just to fill out the list,
or the random soldier that has this irrational hatred of Shay that could just
the captain guy.
Zoo. Speaking of characters that were a little one-dimensional,
he has like a 0 power ranking.
Purpose in life seems to be to try to kill Shay, and it's like, dude, don't you have like hobbies or anything, like anything else to do with yourself?
Don't you still have to protect people?
He gets defeated by a bed. I mean,
hate to see it.
Hate to see it. It was a fun, because I'm waiting. I wonder how Sanderson's gonna pull off his famous Sanderlanche in a novella. So it was cute to see how he had those callbacks to things like crawling under the bed and changing certain things and noting that there was mildew and stuff. So it was fun. Definitely the bet is probably close to the top 3. Just for lack of numbers.
Yeah.
All right. Well, guys, do you have any last parting comments, thoughts, ideas about the Emperor's Soul or the Cosmere at large before we call it a day?
Yeah, I mean, I guess hopefully you haven't listened to this if you haven't read it yet, because we just spoiled the whole thing. But
Right.
I think that this is a great book, like I said earlier, to recommend to your friends if you want to get them into fantasy and you need like this easy access point. Hand them Emperor's Soul, and I don't think you'll regret it.
Yeah. It's just really accessible. I think we've all said that, and it's just a showcase of Sanderson doing culture so differently, which lead to the magics being so differently, while still having really relatable characters.
Yeah, I was gonna. Sorry, I know that we're kind of running out of time.
Keep rolling.
Hey,
keep
let's
rolling.
keep it rolling, man. As long
One
as
of the
you guys
things
are happy, we're happy.
Mhm.
I think that it is so hard nowadays to not appropriate cultures, and
Yeah.
that is something that I think is just amazing on how Sanderson did this, where it didn't feel like he was trying to do that. You know what I mean? Like it definitely, like you could tell that he was speaking about a culture, and he definitely took elements from it, but it was all in really good taste. And
Yeah.
I don't know, I that's such a hard line to walk as an author,
It was
and
definitely
I
more
think
of
he did it
a
really well.
like an inspiration rather than like in Game of Thrones, the Dothraki are the obviously like based off of Genghis Khan. You know what I mean? Like that kind of thing. Like that's just an obvious one-to-one. Whereas this was more, and it's like he saw something, it inspired him, and it's I don't know.
Totally agree. Felt it was lovingly inspired
Mhm.
without ever feeling icky or anything like
Yeah.
that in how he was using the elements he was inspired by.
Speaking of the different cultures, for some reason, when I was remembering this book, I thought the blood sealer was a wolf person. I was like excited to get to the wolf person part of the book, and I was like, "Oh, he just has he's just white with red eyes." Like I don't know why in my memory it somehow got corrupted to be a wolf, but
You've
Yeah,
read Wheel of Time too many times, Jake.
I don't know. So that was my disappointment this time around. No wolf
No,
Bothered you.
not
person.
enough Wolfmen. That's fair.
Not enough wolf, man. Yeah, I was disappointed by that too.
Mm. Would have definitely spiced a few things up if they
Yeah.
replaced some of these one-dimensional guys with Wolfmen instead. It would have made it a little more exciting.
Zoo should have been a wolf man at the very least. It's like if you're just gonna spend the whole time drawing your sword and saying I'm gonna enjoy killing you, it might as well be like wolf fangs instead of a sword.
Yeah. And then it might be more believable that he just lunged on the bed.
Oh man.
But no, I agree with you guys. This was a great, great work of Sanderson. Brandon Sanderson somehow just always, he's got to be the least controversial fantasy author in the game. He just always writes really relatable characters. Every world, every magic system, every character is so genuine and unique and created to tell the story that he's crafting, and it it's just really pleasant to read. Like we've the first book series we ever read was Mistborn, and that's because Dylan and I, like you were referencing, Ben, it was always kind of our go-to recommendation for just modern fantasy at large, because Sanderson just has a way of writing for the reader. And this is perhaps like you were saying, an even more accessible gateway into not only Sanderson's work but into high fantasy at large. And I think you wouldn't be making a mistake starting here by any means. And as coming from me, as someone who hasn't read a lot of the Cosmere, I thoroughly enjoyed a lot of the components of this, and I'd be excited to go back and reread it after checking out Stormlight. That's definitely the biggest gap in my reading library. So no, I loved it. Fun experience, and that's the thing. It's this experience that Sanderson really nails.
Yeah.
All
Well
right,
said.
guys. Well,
Yeah.
Yeah, Fantology, guys, check them out. This was Ben and Jake, but if you can imagine,
Thanks,
there's
guys.
3
It's been a
more of them
pleasure.
out there, so you definitely got to check them out. You guys have been dropping a lot of really interesting stuff. That is Stormlight, right? All those chapters that are getting
The
released,
pre-releases.
the
Yeah.
pre-releases.
Yeah, the new book comes out next month. So
Awesome. I've been avoiding them because of spoilers, but I've heard really good things about them. So if you're caught up on Stormlight, definitely check those out. But they've read everything. They've got a back catalog that's definitely worth checking out. So Ben and Jake, thank you guys so much for coming on. We really appreciate the opportunity to have you on the show. We only started a few months ago, so to see the support from guys like you, it means a lot. So thank you so much for being here with us.
well, thanks for having us. We had a great time.
Thanks, guys.
Awesome.
Yeah,
Well,
let me say thanks too, because
okay.
you said it all, and we do really appreciate it.
Great. I'm glad you fought for that moment.
I need it, Charles. I need it.
Okay, guys. Thanks again, and hopefully we'll have you on again soon. You'll be our resident Cosmere experts.
I don't know about that, but we'd love to come back.
Awesome. All right, guys. Thanks, everybody. And as always, go forth and conquer, friends.